Hey warriors, if someone fears your silence, you've already won without saying a word. Because this world doesn't reward the loudest voice. It rewards the one who knows when to shut up. Machiavelli never taught people to be silent out of fear. That's the excuse insecure thinkers use when they can't handle the discomfort of their own thoughts. What he actually taught was far more dangerous than quietness. He taught control. He taught observation. He taught how to stand unmoved in a room where everyone else is scrambling to fill the void with noise. Look around your life for a moment at work, in relationships, in social settings. You'll notice something strange. The people who need constant noise rarely hold real power. They look busy. They look engaged. They smile while drowning in their own discomfort with emptiness. Machiavelli understood this centuries ago. Power doesn't come from talking. It comes from presence, from stillness, from knowing how people reveal themselves when silence becomes unbearable. If someone panics in your silence, it's not because they're stronger than you. It's because they understand something you were never taught. They understand that their entire sense of self depends on external validation. They know how silence creates pressure. They know how pauses expose weakness. They know how the absence of sound forces confrontation with internal emptiness. And most importantly, they know that secure people rest. Secure people pause. They don't expect constant stimulation. They don't believe entertainment equals existence. They don't panic when noise disappears. Weak players don't think like that. They don't fear your words. They fear your silence. They wait for you to fill space. They expect you to comfort them. They believe connection requires constant sound. The moment you refuse, they break. This video is not about becoming silent out of fear. It's not about avoiding conversation or withdrawing from life. It's about understanding the psychology behind why some people cannot tolerate quietness. Because embracing silence doesn't make you passive. It makes you unreadable. It only makes you a target to those who panic in stillness. Machiavelli never promised noise. He promised power. He promised clarity in a world where clarity is drowned by constant distraction. He promised that once you understand why silence terrifies weak minds, you stop being intimidated by people's desperate need for validation. In the next minutes, you'll learn 10 psychological principles Machiavelli observed long before social media addiction, constant stimulation, and modern anxiety. These are not motivational quotes. These are mental frameworks that help you stop performing, stop explaining, and stop bleeding energy to people who can't sit with themselves. If you stay until the end, you won't feel noisier. You'll feel calmer, steadier, impossible to shake. Now, I want you to drop this affirmation in the comments: I own my silence. Number 1. Why weak people fear silence. Machiavelli noticed something most people never want to accept because it attacks their self-image before it attacks their logic. The people who fear silence the most are not stupid, aggressive, or necessarily unkind. They are insecure. They are dependent. They are external. They base their entire sense of worth on constant feedback from their environment, expecting the same continuous validation in return. And that dependency becomes a prison for anyone who refuses to perform. Weak people don't fear power directly. They fear exposure. They observe who becomes uncomfortable with pauses, who rushes to fill conversational gaps, who needs reassurance that everything is okay. These are not character flaws. They are signals. And signals reveal vulnerability. A weak person assumes shared discomfort. They assume silence is awkward. They assume quietness means rejection. That assumption is their weakness. The moment you realize the other side cannot tolerate stillness, you understand exactly how to control the interaction. Weak people don't need to overpower you. They simply wait for you to speak first. Machiavelli understood that confidence without awareness becomes predictability, and predictability is not strength in psychological warfare. It is surrender. When someone knows exactly how long you'll tolerate silence, how much discomfort you'll excuse, how many pauses you'll fill before asserting yourself, they no longer have to guess. They calculate. This is why weak people feel comfortable escalating tension slowly. They test with small silences, a pause, an unanswered question, a moment of dead air. They watch your response. If you break first, they advance. If you fill the space, they continue. If you explain instead of observing, they learn your limits. Each reaction teaches them how uncomfortable you are with nothingness. Weak people often believe talking earns respect. Machiavelli saw the opposite. Talk without leverage invites manipulation. When someone realizes you will always choose noise over position, they no longer need to negotiate. They only need to wait. The danger is not quietness. The danger is predictability. Weak people don't fear silence itself. They fear people who are comfortable with it. They fear those who don't reveal thresholds early. They fear individuals who observe quietly instead of reacting immediately. This is why Machiavelli warned against showing all your cards on the surface. Not because strength is fake, but because broadcasting it removes flexibility. When people know exactly who you are at all times, they know exactly how to disturb your peace. The solution is not noise. It is strategic comfort with emptiness. You don't need to change who you are internally. You need to change what you reveal through constant sound. You don't owe conversation to those who haven't earned trust. You don't owe noise to those collecting weaknesses. You don't owe performance to people who benefit from your discomfort. Once you stop filling silence, you regain leverage. Once you stop fearing pauses, you regain control. Once you stop volunteering your thoughts constantly, you stop being easy to manipulate. I want you to drop this affirmation in the comments: silence is my strength. Number 2, the power of strategic silence. Machiavelli understood that constant speech attracts resistance the way noise attracts attention. When someone talks endlessly, others adjust. They tune out. They prepare counter-arguments. They close their minds. But when power is silent, people lean in. They expose themselves without realizing they are doing it. This is where strategic silence becomes dominant, not defensive. Weak people are always scanning for threats. They don't fear noise as much as they fear gaps. Loud insecurity is easy to respond to. Silent confidence is not. When you present yourself as constantly available, constantly explaining, and constantly engaged, others become dismissive. They speak less carefully. They reveal less. They protect their position. But when you allow pauses to exist, the atmosphere shifts. Strategic silence is not pretending to be indifferent. It is allowing others to misinterpret your lack of reaction as weakness when it's actually observation. It is choosing when not to respond, when not to engage, when not to reveal understanding. This restraint creates false confidence in others. People begin to assume they control the interaction. They rush statements. They over-explain. They show priorities they would normally guard. Machiavelli observed that impatience is a product of perceived safety. When someone believes you're not tracking them, they stop managing themselves carefully. They talk more freely. They test boundaries faster. They escalate without securing position. This is not stupidity. It is human nature responding to perceived passivity. The mistake most people make is trying to prove awareness too early. They interrupt. They correct. They demonstrate intelligence. In doing so, they shut down the flow of information coming toward them. The moment others realize you are observing everything, they stop revealing. Strategic silence keeps the channel open. There's power in letting assumptions remain uncorrected. When someone thinks you don't understand, they explain more. When they think you're not paying attention, they show their hand. When they believe you're uncomfortable with silence, they fill it with truth. This is not manipulation through deception. It's awareness through restraint. Machiavelli didn't teach people to lie. He taught them to listen. And listening requires silence, deliberate, strategic, uncomfortable silence. Silence also forces others to confront themselves. Without constant feedback from you, they begin questioning their own positions. They wonder if they've said too much. They second-guess their approach. They lose certainty. This internal disruption weakens resolve. People who cannot tolerate silence in others usually cannot tolerate silence within themselves. The external noise masks internal chaos. When you refuse to provide distraction through conversation, you force them to sit with discomfort. And discomfort reveals truth. You don't need to attack weakness. you simply need to stop rescuing others from their own silence. When you allow pauses to stretch, you create space for observation, for assessment, for repositioning. Most people panic before that space becomes useful. They break. They talk. They expose. Strategic silence isn't about being cold. It's about being clear. It's about understanding that every word you speak hands control to someone who's listening. And the less you speak, the more others speak. The more others speak, the more they reveal. The more they reveal, the more leverage you gain. I want you to drop this affirmation in the comments: I observe before I speak. Number 3, silence reveals character. Machiavelli understood that words can be rehearsed, but reactions to silence cannot. When someone encounters quietness, their true nature surfaces. No script. No preparation. No mask. Just raw response to emptiness. This is why powerful people use silence as a test. They create pauses intentionally. They watch how others behave when sound disappears. Do they panic? Do they fill space? Do they become anxious? These reactions reveal emotional stability, or the lack of it. Weak people respond to silence with 3 patterns. First, they break it immediately. They cannot tolerate stillness for even a few seconds. They blurt out explanations, jokes, or random observations. This reveals dependency on external validation. They need feedback to feel secure. Second, they interpret silence as hostility. A simple pause becomes rejection in their mind. They ask, "Are you okay?" or "Did I say something wrong?" This reveals fragile self-worth. They assume the worst because they don't trust their own value. Third, they try to control you through guilt. They make your silence about them. You're being quiet. You must be upset with me. This reveals manipulation through victimhood. They weaponize discomfort to force you into reassurance. Machiavelli observed these patterns in political negotiations. Leaders who panicked during pauses always revealed their true priorities. They couldn't maintain composure when feedback stopped. Their anxiety exposed weakness. Strong people respond to silence differently. They remain calm. They don't rush to fill space. They observe. They reflect. They wait. This demonstrates internal security. They don't need constant validation to know where they stand. Silence also reveals intentions. When someone becomes uncomfortable with your quietness, ask yourself, why does my silence threaten them? Usually, it's because they were depending on your reaction to guide their next move. Without your feedback, they lose direction. They need you to speak so they can adjust their approach. When you stay silent, they're forced to show their hand without knowing how you'll respond. This creates strategic advantage. Another pattern: weak people use noise to hide. They talk constantly to avoid being seen. Silence removes that shield. Without conversation to hide behind, their insecurity becomes visible. Their discomfort with themselves shows. This is why Machiavelli warned that those who cannot tolerate silence in others cannot tolerate truth within themselves. They fear stillness because stillness forces confrontation with reality. And reality, for the insecure, is unbearable. You don't need to announce your observations. You simply need to notice. When someone panics in your silence, you've learned something crucial about them. They need external structure to maintain internal stability. And that dependency is leverage. I want you to drop this affirmation in the comments: silence exposes truth. Number 4, why insecurity hates stillness. Machiavelli understood that insecurity is not a lack of confidence. It's a constant need for confirmation. Insecure people don't trust their own assessment of reality. They need others to validate their perceptions continuously. And silence removes that validation. Stillness creates a vacuum. In that vacuum, insecure people confront their own thoughts. And for many, their own thoughts are their greatest enemy. The internal voice tells them they're not enough. The mental chatter criticizes every action. The self-assessment finds only flaws. This is why insecure people avoid silence at all costs. Silence isn't peaceful for them. It's torture. They fill every moment with noise, distraction, entertainment, conversation, anything to avoid being alone with themselves. Music in the background. TV on constantly. Phone always in hand. These aren't preferences. They're coping mechanisms. The noise drowns out the internal criticism they can't face. Machiavelli observed this in court politics. Leaders who needed constant praise, constant activity, constant engagement were the easiest to manipulate. Why? Because their dependency on external input made them predictable. You could control them by controlling the feedback they received. Insecure people also project their discomfort onto others. When they encounter someone comfortable with silence, they assume that person is judging them. They believe the silence is hostile. They interpret stillness as rejection. This projection reveals their internal state. They're judging themselves constantly, so they assume everyone else is too. This creates a cycle. They fear silence because they fear judgment. They fear judgment because they're judging themselves. And because they're judging themselves, they assume others are judging them. The silence simply makes this cycle visible. Another aspect, insecurity needs validation to function. Without external confirmation, insecure people lose sense of direction. They don't trust their own judgment. They need others to tell them they're okay. When you stay silent, you withhold that validation. And without validation, they spiral. This is not cruelty. It's reality. Your silence isn't creating their insecurity. It's revealing it. Machiavelli taught that awareness requires observation, and observation requires silence. When you stop talking, you start seeing. You notice how much people need reassurance. You observe how they manipulate for validation. You recognize patterns of dependency. Insecure people will try to pull you into their noise. They'll ask questions. They'll create drama. They'll manufacture urgency. Anything to get you talking, to get you reacting, to get you validating them. The moment you refuse, you force them to confront what they've been avoiding, themselves. This is why silence is so powerful. It's not passive. It's not avoidance. It's strategic withdrawal of the resource they depend on, your attention. I want you to drop this affirmation in the comments. My silence forces growth. Number 5. The psychology of comfortable silence. Machiavelli noticed that power dynamics shift dramatically based on who's comfortable with silence. In negotiations, in relationships, in conflicts, the person who can tolerate silence the longest usually wins. This isn't about stubbornness. It's about psychological endurance. Comfortable silence demonstrates several things. First, self-sufficiency. You don't need constant interaction to feel secure. You're complete whether someone's talking or not. This self-sufficiency intimidates people who depend on external validation. Second, emotional control. You're not rushed by awkwardness. You're not pressured by discomfort. You can sit with tension without breaking. This control signals strength. Third, strategic thinking. While others are panicking to fill silence, you're observing. You're processing. You're calculating your next move. This gives you advantage. Machiavelli understood that whoever controls the pace controls the outcome. And silence controls pace. When you pause, others rush. When you wait, others reveal. When you remain still, others scramble. This rushing, revealing, and scrambling hands you leverage. Most people were never taught to be comfortable with silence. From childhood, we're conditioned to fill every moment. Constant stimulation. Continuous noise. Perpetual engagement. We learn that silence means something's wrong. This conditioning makes silence feel unnatural, even threatening. But this conditioning is not universal. Some cultures embrace silence. Japanese culture, for example, values the space between. They see silence as essential for understanding. Western culture, particularly American, treats silence as failure. This cultural difference reveals something important. Discomfort with silence is learned, which means it can be unlearned. The process isn't complicated. Start with small pauses. When someone asks a question, count to 3 before responding. Notice the discomfort in them and in yourself. Don't fill the space. Let it exist. This practice builds tolerance for silence. Over time, you become comfortable with pauses that would have terrified you before. You stop feeling responsible for filling every conversational gap. You stop believing silence equals rejection. Machiavelli practiced this in diplomatic negotiations. He would let silence stretch until his opponents began making concessions just to end the discomfort. He didn't threaten. He didn't argue. He simply waited. And in that waiting, others revealed their bottom line. This technique works because most people cannot tolerate silence long enough to maintain their position. They crack. They compromise. They give ground. Not because you convinced them, but because they couldn't handle stillness. Another benefit of comfortable silence. It filters relationships. People who need constant noise will naturally move away from you. People appreciate depth will move closer. This isn't rejection. It's selection. You're creating an environment that only certain people can tolerate, people who are secure enough to value quality over quantity. I want you to drop this affirmation in the comments: I rest in stillness. Number 6. Why silence intimidates manipulators. Machiavelli observed that manipulators rely on predictable reactions. They say something. You respond. They adjust based on your response. This feedback loop allows them to calibrate their approach. But silence breaks that loop. When you don't respond, manipulators lose their compass. They can't gauge effectiveness. They can't adjust tactics. They can't proceed with confidence. This uncertainty weakens their control. Manipulators use several techniques that depend on your participation. Guilt trips require you to defend yourself. Gaslighting requires you to question your reality. Love bombing requires you to reciprocate. All these tactics need your response to work. Silence denies that response. When someone tries to guilt you and you stay silent, the guilt has nowhere to land. When someone gaslights and you don't argue, there's no confusion to exploit. When someone love bombs and you don't react emotionally, the manipulation fails. This is why manipulators panic when you go silent. Their entire strategy depends on your engagement. Without it, they're powerless. Machiavelli taught that power lies in what you withhold, not what you give. Withholding reaction is one of the most powerful forms of withholding. Another aspect, manipulators need to know they've affected you. That's their fuel. Your visible emotional reaction confirms their influence. Your silence removes that confirmation. They're left wondering if they matter at all. This uncertainty is unbearable for manipulators. Their entire identity is built on affecting others. When you don't react, you challenge that identity. You demonstrate that their tactics don't work on you. This forces them to either escalate, which exposes them further, or withdraw, which means you've won. Manipulators will try to force you to break silence. They'll ask, "Why aren't you talking?" They'll accuse you of being passive-aggressive. They'll claim your silence is abusive. These are manipulation tactics disguised as concern. They're trying to guilt you into re-engaging so they can regain control. Machiavelli warned against falling for emotional manipulation. The moment you explain your silence, you've lost. The moment you justify your boundaries, you've given them leverage. The moment you defend your right to remain quiet, you've entered their game. Instead, maintain silence. Let them interpret it however they want. Let them escalate if they choose. Their escalation only exposes their desperation. And desperation is weakness. You don't need to argue with manipulators. You don't need to prove they're wrong. You simply need to stop participating in their manipulation. Silence is the most efficient way to do that. I want you to drop this affirmation in the comments: my silence cannot be manipulated. Because they were convinced through argument, but because they were impressed by presence. Silence also demonstrates respect for your own thoughts. When you speak constantly, you signal that your words are cheap. When you speak selectively, you signal that your thoughts have value. This self-respect is contagious. When you respect your own voice enough to use it sparingly, others respect it too. Another dynamic, silence forces others to come to you. When you're always talking, always explaining, always engaging, people become passive. they wait for you to provide information, entertainment, validation. But when you're silent, they have to seek you out. They have to ask questions. They have to invest energy. This shift in energy expenditure alters the power dynamic. Whoever invests more energy has less power. By being silent, you force others to invest energy in engaging you. This investment creates psychological commitment. They're now more invested in the interaction than you are. Machiavelli taught that power flows toward those who care less. Silence demonstrates you care less about filling space than about maintaining position. This demonstration commands respect. People sense when someone is secure enough to not need constant validation. That security attracts respect naturally. You don't have to perform for it. You simply have to embody it. I want you to drop this affirmation in the comments: my silence commands respect. Number 8. Why weak people interpret silence as hostility. Machiavelli observed that perception reveals more about the perceiver than the perceived. When someone interprets your silence as hostility, they're revealing their internal state, not yours. Weak people assume hostility in silence because hostility is what they feel toward themselves. They have aggressive internal dialogues. Their self-talk is critical, harsh, judgmental. So when they encounter silence, they project that internal hostility outward. They assume you're thinking what they think about themselves. This projection is defensive. If they can make your silence about hostility toward them, they don't have to confront their hostility toward themselves. They externalize the problem. They make you the issue instead of looking inward. Machiavelli warned against accepting other people's interpretations of your behavior. When someone says you're being hostile by staying silent, they're telling you how they experience silence. They're not describing your intention. The question becomes, why do you care about their experience? If you immediately defend yourself, explain your intentions, or try to make them comfortable, you've accepted responsibility for their internal state. You've agreed that their perception is your problem. Machiavelli taught that strong people maintain frame. Frame is your interpretation of reality. When someone tries to impose their frame, your silence, they claim, means hostility, you have two options. Accept their frame and start explaining, which gives them control. Or maintain your frame, which keeps control with you. Maintaining frame means letting them be uncomfortable with your silence. It means not explaining, not justifying, not reassuring. It means understanding that their discomfort is not your responsibility. This doesn't make you cold. It makes you clear about boundaries. Another aspect, weak people use accusations of hostility to manipulate. If they can make you feel guilty for being silent, they can force you to engage. They weaponize their discomfort to control your behavior. Machiavelli observed this tactic in political enemies. When they couldn't defeat him directly, they attacked his silence. They claimed he was plotting. They suggested his quietness was suspicious. They tried to force him to explain himself. His response? More silence. By refusing to defend himself, he demonstrated the accusations were baseless. If he had explained, defended, or justified, he would have legitimized their claims. His silence made their accusations look foolish. This is the power of maintaining silence in the face of interpretation. You force others to either escalate, which makes them look unreasonable, or retreat, which means they've lost. Most people cannot tolerate being seen as unreasonable, so they retreat. The lesson? When someone interprets your silence negatively, that interpretation is their weakness, not yours. Don't accept ownership of their perception. Let them sit with their interpretation. Let them be uncomfortable. Their discomfort is not your emergency. I want you to drop this affirmation in the comments: their discomfort is not my problem. Number 9. Silence as a tool for emotional detachment. Machiavelli understood that emotional investment equals vulnerability. When you're emotionally engaged, you can be manipulated through emotion. When you're detached, emotional manipulation bounces off. Silence creates detachment. When you stop responding emotionally to provocations, you stop being controllable. People can say whatever they want. You remain still. They can create drama. You observe. They can escalate. You remain unmoved. This detachment is not indifference. It's strategic disengagement from emotional manipulation. you still care about outcomes. You're just not reactive to emotional bait. Weak people use emotional volatility to control situations. They create urgency through panic. They generate pressure through drama. They manufacture crises to force reactions. All these tactics depend on your emotional participation. Silence removes that participation. When someone creates drama and you respond with silence, the drama dies. Without your emotional energy feeding it, it cannot sustain. This frustrates people who rely on emotional manipulation. They need you to care, to react, to engage. Your silence demonstrates you don't. Machiavelli practiced this with political rivals. When they attacked him personally, he didn't defend. When they spread rumors, he didn't correct. When they tried to provoke him, he remained silent. This silence communicated something powerful: they couldn't touch him. Their attacks had no effect. This realization demoralized his enemies. Emotional detachment through silence also preserves energy. Emotional engagement is exhausting. Drama drains you. Constant reaction depletes reserves. Silence conserves energy. While others are burning themselves out on emotional volatility, you're resting in stillness. This energy differential creates long-term advantage. They collapse from exhaustion. You remain strong. Another benefit: silence allows perspective. When you're emotionally engaged, you're inside the situation. You can't see clearly. But when you're silent and detached, you're observing from outside. You see patterns. You recognize manipulation. You identify weak points. This perspective is strategic advantage. Machiavelli taught that emotion is the enemy of strategy. When emotion controls you, you make predictable moves. When detachment controls you, you make calculated moves. Silence is the bridge between emotion and detachment. The more comfortable you are with silence, the less reactive you become. The less reactive you are, the more strategic you can be. I want you to drop this affirmation in the comments: I choose observation over reaction. Number 10. The final truth about silence and power. Machiavelli never promised comfort. He understood that silence is uncomfortable, but discomfort builds strength. Those who avoid discomfort place themselves in vulnerable cycles. Those who embrace discomfort rise above manipulation. The final truth is not about winning conversations. It's about becoming unreachable through noise. Weak people operate where constant engagement exists. They provoke where reaction is guaranteed. They invest energy where validation is available. When those channels close, their power stops. Machiavelli recognized that true power is not domination. It's cost. When interacting with you becomes expensive, behavior changes. Becoming untouchable through silence doesn't require aggression. It requires self-command. When reactions are measured, words are sparse, and engagement is selective, others adjust. They test less. They provoke less. They redirect attention elsewhere. Influence fades naturally. The goal is not control over others. It's control over self. Once that is established, external manipulation loses traction. Weak people thrive on verbal access. Remove access through silence, and tactics weaken. Without feedback, pressure cannot calibrate. Machiavelli understood that position is maintained through consistency of principle, not predictability of response. Values remain stable. Expression varies. This balance confuses those seeking leverage while grounding those observing. Untouchability through silence also alters perception. People sense when boundaries exist without being announced. They feel when engagement is optional, not reactive. This perception changes treatment. Interactions become cautious. Behavior moderates. Many believe respect is demanded through words. Machiavelli observed that it is earned indirectly. When you don't chase validation, validation chases you. When you don't argue narratives, narratives dissolve. When you don't defend identity through constant speech, identity stabilizes. The final truth is simple but difficult. Power is not loud. It is quiet alignment. It adjusts environment rather than reacting within them. It shapes context instead of debating content. Weak people cannot operate effectively in environments they don't control through noise. Becoming costly through silence doesn't mean being distant from everyone. It means reserving speech for those who respect boundaries. It means choosing where words flow. It means understanding that availability of your voice is leverage. Machiavelli did not advise isolation. He advised selectivity. Influence remains strongest when engagement is intentional, when presence is earned, not automatic. This selectivity forces others to self-regulate. Once people realize that provoking you produces no verbal response, strategies shift, attention moves, pressure dissipates. You are no longer a useful target. Not because you defeated anyone, but because interaction no longer benefits them. This is the final Machiavellian lesson about silence. The objective is not domination. It is elevation beyond reach. When your internal state cannot be disturbed by absence of noise, external behavior loses relevance. Position is freedom, and freedom is the ultimate advantage. If they fear your silence, don't fill the void to comfort them. Filling keeps you inside their frame. It keeps you reacting to discomfort you didn't create. Mastering silence mentally is not about tricks. It's about clarity. Clarity about who you are, what you allow, and where your voice goes. Everything you've heard in this video points to one truth. Power doesn't announce itself. It doesn't rush to explain. It doesn't justify itself to feel safe. Power adjusts the environment and lets others expose themselves through their discomfort with quietness. The moment you stop reacting on command, the moment you stop fearing pauses, the moment you stop proving your worth through constant speech, something shifts. People become careful around you, not because you threatened them, but because they can't provoke you anymore. And people who can't be provoked are expensive to deal with. You don't need to confront every comment. You don't need to win every verbal exchange. You don't need to correct every misunderstanding. Your job is not to be entertaining. Your job is to be positioned. Once people realize you don't chase verbal validation, don't beg for auditory clarity, don't panic under silent pressure, they stop testing you. Not out of morality, out of self-interest. Because manipulation only works where verbal access is cheap. Remember this. You don't become powerful by adding noise. You become powerful by removing the need for it. If this video helped you see silence more clearly, if it gave you language for things you felt but couldn't explain, do 3 things right now. Like this video so it reaches people who need awareness, not comfort. Share it with someone who keeps getting manipulated because they fear silence. And subscribe to the channel because the next videos will go even deeper into power, psychology, and mental control. Drop your thoughts in the comments. Tell me which principle hit hardest. And remember, you don't win by filling silence, you win by owning it. Stay sharp, stay aware, and never fear the quiet.